JT Wister still of Locked On Utes. I'm going to give this to you first. It's a bit of a trap question, but it's a valid question. Who is, and if you asked SP Plus, oh boy, the team that you represent is right there. Who is the most disappointing team in America in 2024?
It is the Florida State Seminoles, number 1.
Boom.
The Utah Utes, number 2. Florida State's the most disappointing team. Florida State was ranked inside the top 10. Florida State is 1-7 currently versus Utah is 4-4. They are only, of their last 4 games for Florida State, only one has been within 1 score. So it's insane how bad Florida State has been. You look at the loss to Memphis too. They beat Cal, but outside of that, just an abysmal year for the Seminoles. The year has become abysmal for Utah, but it did not start this way. They still have wins at Oklahoma State. They beat Baylor. They took care of business early on in the season. They're a mess right now. Once again, they are the second most disappointing team, but they have 3 more wins than Florida State. Florida State was projected to finish higher. A lot of people are still thinking Florida State was going to win the ACC, and that did not come to fruition. So right now, Florida State is the most disappointing team. But when you look at the preseason expectations that were placed at Utah, and I'll take some blame for that as well. I thought this team was capable of doing a lot too. They have completely fallen short of that. Some of that has to do with injuries, but a lot of that also has to do just players not playing up to the standard that they'd either played up to in the past or just are struggling mightily right now. So Utah is the second most disappointing team. I mean, everyone was picking this team to win the conference, basically. Look at College Game Day. I think they all picked Utah to win the Big 12. It wasn't just a preseason poll. It was more than that. This Utah team is underwhelmed. Injuries play a role, but more than anything, there are a lot of issues that just extend from the coaches down to the players on the field that have made this season for Utah, honestly, you could argue the biggest disappointment in Utah football history.
I was just pulling it up here. Based on SP Plus preseason projections, here are the teams that are underachieving the most in America. At 134, Oregon State, 133, Liberty. At this point, okay, so when do we finally get a team we recognize? 129, the worst Big 12 team, according to SP Plus, in the underachieving category, the Utah Utes. Which makes a lot of sense, being to me, a top 10 preseason school, and now struggling to make a bowl game. Obviously, Florida State's up there, but I want to make a case that Oklahoma State is worse than Utah. And the reason why, Utah returned a lot of production, but they also returned production that was based on 2022. I looked at this Utah roster and said, okay, if they can replicate what they had in 2022, guys that were hurt last season, whether it be the entire season or banged up for most of the year, who were coming back into the fold this year, we had not seen them healthy during the duration of a season since Tom Brady. You mentioned this, since Tom Brady was playing NFL football. So I had built the idea of the Utah Utes being an elite college football team around how they were that season and what they were brought back from production that year into this year. For Oklahoma State, I watched these same guys do it last year. Alan Bowman to Ollie Gordon. And it's maybe the wildest stat of this whole deal. 20 of 22 starters came back for Oklahoma State. 20 of 22 from last season with the Doak Walker Award winner, 3 elite wide receivers, and a quarterback who's been in college for a really long time. And they too will be the most disappointing team in the Mike Gundy era, and his first to go below 500 based on the way they're playing right now, and they can't even string a football season together. Do you feel like, as a Utah fan, then you can look at an Oklahoma State or a UCF or an Arizona and say, well, they underachieved too, so we don't feel as bad? Did you get any reprieve from how terrible Oklahoma State is?
I guess a little bit. It's nice to not be the only bum team in the Big 12, basically. Like it's been very rough.
The only team with a winning record out of the preseason top 5 in the Big 12, Kansas State. That's it. Other 4 are below 500.
Which is crazy. Also, it's wild. We've talked a lot about the similarities between Kyle Whittingham and Mike Gundy. The fact that both of them are in the midst of such a rough season. There could even be a bigger conversation about that, about older college football coaches that have managed to stick around for a while, but maybe haven't been able to adapt to the changes as much. Talking about Oklahoma State. So to me, they're really disappointing. And at least with Utah, you're right. Like we can at least say, hey, Cam Rising's hurt. This is just the truth. Some people are going to take this as an excuse. If Utah scored 25 points every game this season, they would have 1 loss on their record right now. When Cam was last healthy in 22, Utah averaged 38 points per game. So that's part of the reason that we were very high on this Utah team. Right now, I don't know. The games probably would have changed. So maybe that wouldn't have held. And either way, this Utah team probably would have underwhelmed even if Cam was healthy based on what's played out so far. But in the case of Oklahoma State, gosh, just so many like fraudulent kind of games last year, right? The South Alabama loss 33-7. I look at the UCF game 45-3, even against Texas 49-21. There was only one game Utah got blown out last year's team, even with backups and everything. And that was the Arizona game. And they were down also they're like top 4 guys on defense too. So I just looked at this Utah team. Like when you have a top 5 run defense coming back, you have a history of producing NFL defensive backs. Cam Rising's coming back. Brant Keithy's coming back. Like I said, 38 points per game when they're healthy. I didn't see this team being bad. The reason they were picked to win the conference is because experience is usually a good thing. But man, it has not been for this year too. And just some of these players have not performed up to their standard. Utah's tackling issues have been wild to watch play out. Utah's been out coached frequently. For how we could have before the season, I could have seen how Oklahoma State and same thing with UCF and even Arizona in some ways with what they lost would be where they were. Drake, there was no scenario that I saw Utah lose in Houston. Like how did that? I just can't believe that's what happened. And that's why to me, Utah is one of the biggest disappointments in all college football, only behind 1-7 Florida State.
Really hope that we see you on the squad show Thursday, by the way. I was going to leave the Houston thing for the squad show, but holy cow. Who do you blame? Who do you blame for this collapse?
You know what? Number one, I will go Kyle Whittingham. He's the head coach. I think that there has been a number of things where, Utah's whole thing, like you will become us, not we will become you, has been an issue. I just feel like there's a lot more things they could have been doing sooner on offense to support Isaac Wilson. The missed tackling issues, the injuries, the way some of those things have been handled. Like if we're going to break it down to like who's not executing on the field, I've said this multiple times, like it's the quarterbacks by far. Like every game there are plays to be made. Utah, even when Mekhi Bernard, even against Houston, he's averaging 3 yards per carry. You run it twice, that still gets you to 3rd and 3. You just need to get one pass then basically. And that's what it came down to Utah so often, right? Is they could not convert on 3rd down because their passing offense makes me want to just throw myself into a wall basically every time I watch the play. So number one, I blame Kyle Whittingham just because he is the head coach. He's the one in charge of all of this. But at the end of the day, when you don't have a quarterback and Utah does not, it's very hard to win games in college football. And it's so wild. Like we said, like, yes, you drove into some of the advanced analytics of why Utah maybe doesn't have the best defense in the Big 12. But at the end of the day, Utah's defense every single week has given this team an opportunity to win. And on the offensive side of the ball, they have consistently squandered it due to coaching and quarterback more than anything else.
Yeah, Utah's offense 92nd. Oh, even worse. 93rd against the rush this season, EPA wise, and then 102nd, not against, but that is running the football offensively, 93rd, and then throwing the football 102nd out of 134 FBS teams. That is not very good. Coming up, is Kyle Whittingham done after this year? Certainly not fired. I wouldn't ever make that case, but he could hang it up. We thought he was going to. Will things change based on how this year went? This is a Locked On Utes, Locked On Big 12 crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is where I go to say, hey, I think the Baylor Bears are really going to put it on the Oklahoma State Cowboys. I haven't had a lot of confidence in my alma mater here recently, but they've been good the last 2 weeks. So why not throw some money on them? And I did at America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel. New customers right now get $5. More. I'll give you even more. I'll give you $150 if you put a $5 bet down if you win that $5 bet. So $150 in bonus bets if you win a $5 bet that you put down. And you can bet on the NFL. You can bet on college football. You can bet on games live. You get a hunch in the middle of a game. You know what? I think this team's going to come back. I'm going to put some money on their money line or their spread. Middle of the game, you check the latest stats, view live play-by-play, all on FanDuel, and then submit a bet. That is at FanDuel.com. Again, get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.